Well, I was making a Showbiz video until Muse released HEXAGONS. Honestly, I'm quite surprised that this was the one that they released, because on the track listing, this was the longest song. As soon as I saw the track listing, I wanted to know what the longest song would sound like, and I don't really know what I was expecting, but I wasn't expecting this. My prediction would have been that it would have something to do with the number 6. Obviously, the song's called HEXAGONS. But if I was writing a song called HEXAGONS, I'd like to think that I would introduce time signatures in 3 or in 6, or play with it structurally like that. And to be honest, given how few songs Muse write in 3 or 6, I quite frankly found that to be unlikely. But I'm completely wrong. In fact, rhythmically, this song is quite interesting. So I'm just going to talk about the song, things that I like, things that I've noticed. I'll try and be as detailed as possible and then talk about my overall thoughts for what this album is, what I'm hoping it's going to be, and what my thoughts are at this stage based on the singles we've heard. The song actually starts off in 4/4, but before we get into that, I think I'm just going to talk about the structure overall. This song is structurally really different, and I really like it. In fact, just the intro alone, before you hear any vocals, already has so many distinct sections. The intro starts off with a tapping section, first of all. And so you've got this guitar tapping on each of the downbeats, and then you've also got these synths in the background. So there's 2 parts, 2 voices in this tapping intro. And then we bring away the arpeggiating bit to have more of a solo-y section. So the tapping section leads into a solo-y section, which reminds me quite a bit of MK Ultra. I have to say, when I first heard it, I was a bit unsure of the melody choices being made. It didn't really feel like it had much purposeful direction. It felt like we were just sort of noodling around on the guitar to find a melody. All the notes being roughly the same duration as well sort of gives it that vibe. But after having listened to this a couple of times, and obviously it can only be a couple of times because this song has only been out for a couple of hours, I do think it fits the song because the song has a lot of drive. But as for a direction other than forwards, it doesn't really have that much in the way of a distinct direction. It does feel like it has this linear progression going on, but in some ways it also feels like it doesn't, because we're bringing instruments out, we're bringing out layers, we're bringing new layers in, and it's not like Showbiz where we're building from the beginning to the end continuously. But the overall journey of the song is a linear progression, which I love. And once we come out of that solo-y bit, the synths come back in, and we haven't yet reached the really climactic bit with the other guitars. We have these synths coming in to complement the solo-y bit, and then the guitars go back to tapping, and that's when those distorted guitars come in, those heavier guitars, and that sounds very Space Dementia to me. And there are these tom fills. The toms sound like they're tuned quite high, a little bit electronic sounding in how those fills are being played. The thing it most reminds me of, not just sounding like Space Dementia, is actually the Man with a Harmonica intro to Knights of Sidonia. That's what it sounds like a lot more to me. And when we crescendo out of that section, there's this acoustic section. This is when we're now in 6/4, I'm going to call it. The acoustic section is quite interesting because given the other singles, we haven't actually heard that in any of the other songs. And we come out of that acoustic sections when the synths come back in. I heard a couple people describe these synths as sounding very reminiscent of Space Dementia, and I initially thought that was a bit of an oversimplified observation, but I can actually see it, the way that these synths are continuously climbing up on arpeggio, kind of like how we do in Space Dementia in the verses. I can see the similarities. But the drive really comes in when the bass comes in at the end of that acoustic section. I'm loving the phaser on the bass. I'm pretty sure it is a phaser, but when the bass note is being played, at the end of the sustained note, there is this crescendo in volume or in texture. I think it's a phaser effect. But the bass is what is lending the drive to this song. The arpeggiating synths are obviously really helping, but I think it's the bass that is doing the underlying work. And so we're now in quite a dramatic part of the song. But like I said, this isn't really a linear progression. What happens is the layers get removed. We then bring it back down for another verse, but there's no acoustic element this time. But because we have those synths in the background and that bass, which are doing slightly less than they just were, this verse feels a lot more driven than the acoustic verse. And instead of going back into a big dramatic section, what actually happens is we go into a section with the ride cymbal and the vocals become a lot more delicate. So Matt's vocals in this song are mostly in the lower register. This is quite unusual actually in most Muse songs, but he's been doing it quite a lot this album. And he now actually, that register for him is a very strong register, and he can get great projection and power there. And his falsetto over time has actually become more airy, which you'd obviously expect, but he uses it to effect here. So when we have the ride cymbal, which is a delicate part of the drum kit, providing that backbeat, the falsetto that Matt uses makes this whole section feel very delicate and very airy compared to the heavier, more driven sections of this song that we then turn into immediately after, into what I would call the chorus of the song. You can't really tell, if it's a pre-chorus or if it's a chorus, but I would call it a chorus with two halves for sure. And we have a less energetic half and we have the more energetic half. So the less energetic half being about resistance, is mass produced, and the more energetic section being the reach out and touch me section. Those are really cool lyrics that are really performed very dramatically as well. It really sells the moment. It does remind me, I keep saying it, of Space Dementia, because when you think about the lyrics of Space Dementia, much of what makes Space Dementia work, maybe without realizing, is the emotion and vocal delivery of Matt in that song. Some of those lyrics, if they weren't performed with 110% effort, might fall a bit flat or not really work, which is often true of many Muse songs. But I think Matt really sells the moment here, and that's what Muse need in order for Muse songs to land, because let's face it, the lyrics are hardly ever good, and I'm saying that as a long-time Muse fan. The music and the vocal delivery needs to sell that moment, and I think we achieve that in this song, which is really refreshing actually. And after what has now been the most dramatic part of the song, we then take it back to that ride cymbal again, a more stripped back section, and then we go back into the big chorus. After that chorus, that is our last one, and we have a big outro, which is just essentially a crescendo of all the ideas we've heard already. We aren't really doing that much differently. We have the same arpeggios roughly. The arpeggio does change at the end. Even though it's triplets, it's arpeggiating up and down instead of just arpeggiating up as it has been throughout this song. Although there have been sections, especially in the stripped back sections, where the arpeggio actually went down in triplets. We have been alternating as well in the arpeggios between subdivisions of 2 or 4 compared to triplets. And when we go back to this big outro is in 4/4. So it's triplets in 4/4 as opposed to the 6/4 middle section of the song. We essentially have the opening in 4/4, the main bulk of the song in 6/4, and then the outro in 4/4. And you can tell the middle section is true 6/4 or some multiple thereof, because all of the chords in each of the sections of the chord progression last for multiples of 3 bars. So this isn't 12/8, this isn't 4 with triplets, this is 6/4. That's how I would count it. Although you could count it as 6/8, but if you're really interested in talking about Muse time signatures, then I have an entire video I made 2 years ago that documented every single time signature in the entire Muse discography. So even though that is now out of date, thank you HEXAGONS, it is still there. And then surprisingly, at the end of the outro section, there is this lead-in, presumably, to the next song, which would be The Sickness in You and I. There was a riff played at the Brixton gig that was rumoured to be from that song, so maybe if we do get a 5th single, that'll be the one. Releasing HEXAGONS now means that we have 3 songs in chronological order, Cryogen being track 4, Be With You track 5, HEXAGONS track 6. If they were to release Sickness in You and I, that would be track 7. And then we've got track 8 already, which is Unraveling. So we'd have half of the album already in order as well. I'm quite surprised that there's a direct lead-in, to be honest with you. That is another thing that we haven't really heard from Muse, probably since Origin of Symmetry, There probably have been more recent instances. It's been a while since I've done full album re-listens, but that is one of those characteristics of Origin of Symmetry that you really remember, is that there are all of these great transitions between songs, especially Citizen Erased and Microcuts, for example, and this feels like one of those. The drum beat is interesting. It's a bit of a reggae drum beat with snares played on the upbeats, and to be honest, it makes me quite excited to hear the next song. So I did make a video on Cryogen and my thoughts about that song after having listened to it. I did really like Cryogen, and I mentioned a couple things that I thought that the album overall may have. I was quite curious whether or not the staticky effects from Cryogen would pop up in any of the other songs, given that they are especially not prevalent in Unraveling or Be With You. They don't seem to be present here at all. I would say though, now that I've listened to this song, I think I understand the album and its sound a bit better. I was a bit confused how something as compressed as Cryogen would sound next to something like Be With You, which has these like more digital sections at the end, but also has quite an organic organ sound at the start. How would all of these sounds blend together? And Unraveling as well is very electronic, which did sound quite a lot like Be With You, but not very much like Cryogen. Unraveling has these like extremely heavy 8-string, can hardly make out the pitch breakdowns in drop E, and Cryogen has like a hard rock breakdown, more reminiscent of something from Stockholm Syndrome. How are all of these elements going to work together? Is it going to sound like another Will of the People, where we have all of these different ideas and very little connecting them, no connective tissue, no overarching theme in the album? It seems like, having listened to Cryogen, Be With You and Hexagons in order, that those songs actually work together really well for an album experience and provide you with lots of different things in each song. Much like how Absolution sounds kind of similar, but each song is providing you with something different, a unique experience. Each of those songs has a real identity, and I'm really starting to think that we may be in a place where most, if not all, songs have a really unique identity on this album. At the moment, Unraveling sounds a bit like the black sheep of the album. I know it was written a lot longer before the rest of the songs, but it is starting to feel that way, that maybe the rest of the album is going to have this space rock theme, and the only thing tying Unraveling to that at the moment is the synths. So I am curious if the 8-string guitar is going to make a reappearance. So yeah, overall, I'm very happy. It has a really desperate sounding tone. The vibe is like you're trying to escape from something or from somewhere. The modulations are really cool. We have different time signatures for different sections of the song. We have an atypical song structure. We have, within the tapping itself, switching between the subdivisions of 2 and then the triplets. So we're modulating even within our own sections. We have a cool transition to the next song, whatever that's going to sound like. And we have genuine drama again. That's what it feels like. It's quite a weird song. Like, it's not normal, it is a weird song, but it is also good. And that is actually the appeal, at least it was for me, many years ago, all those years ago, when I first started listening to Muse. They were different, it was quite weird, but it was also good. I think I might have another discussion about how creative it actually is, but I'm going to park that for another time. Because right now, I can confidently say that this song, and mainly how this song exists within a collection of songs that we have gotten, makes me feel very optimistic for this new release. And I know I've said we've been here before, and I've had my fingers burnt more than once, but they've released 4 songs now, and all 4 of them I really like a lot more than any of the singles they've released for example, when they released Dig Down for Simulation Theory and the title track for Will of the People. I've got a feeling this is going to be a really good one, and I will totally be making an orchestral version. I already have so many ideas for what I could do with it. And in preparation for that, I'm re-listening to all of the albums and then making videos that are ranking and giving mini reviews of them. So if you like me talking about this kind of thing and found this interesting, I think that you should probably like the video so more people see it, subscribe so you don't miss those videos, and share in the comments whether or not you think that Muse are really back or not. I'm quite curious to see what people think because there's a bit of a split. I think most people want to be optimistic, but there are also some people who are very pessimistic and not very happy with what we've released so far, or rather had released to us. Always happy to have a discussion, so let me know and do those things.